Hello, my name's Katie Lewis and I'm the Head of MFL at Pearson Edexcel. In this short video, I'm going to introduce you to our accredited GCSE French qualification and highlight the key features of our 2024 MFL approach, which you'll also see coming through in our German and Spanish specifications. So in this first of our video series, I'll explain the background context of the MFL reforms, the key features of our new qualification, our vision for MFL, and our qualification structure. Then, across the series more broadly, we'll cover the thematic context, the compassionate assessments, the speaking paper, the listening and reading papers, the writing and the vocabulary, and our teaching and learning support. So why are we having GCSE MFL reform at all? So as you know, the DfE have an aspiration for 90% of students to be entered for the EBAC by 2025. However, in the summer of 2019, only 40% of students were actually entered for the EBAC. Where the students are missing one of the 5 EBAC subjects, 80% of them are missing the MFL qualification. So that has kind of generated within the DfE this idea that we need to get reform underway for MFL to increase that uptake. So the solutions that they have kind of put forward and embedded into the criteria upon which our accredited GCSE French qualification has been built are less vocabulary, more high frequency vocabulary, the removal of unpredictable vocabulary, and the removal of questions in the target language. But when you think about it, those percentages and those numbers of students who are taking a qualification in MFL are not really the problem. They are the outcome of the problem. The problem really is, why aren't students wanting to take a GCSE in MFL? Or why aren't schools wanting to enter students for a GCSE in MFL? So those are the problems around things like the experience of MFL qualifications as being something which is inaccessible, perhaps something where it's harder to achieve one of the higher grades than a comparable subject. The experience of the assessment of MFL being particularly stressful. When you think about the speaking exam, for example, I think probably across all the exams that our students take, maybe one of the most stressful exams is going to be that speaking MFL assessment. There's the perception of irrelevance of language learning, particularly sadly in our post-Brexit world, that there's no need for me to learn a foreign language, there's no value, there's no point in my learning a foreign language. And then also this idea that learning a language is only for the middle classes, it's only for the high achievers, it's only for the people who are going to go on foreign holidays and those kind of things. So really the underpinning problems of why students aren't interested necessarily in taking up a language are the ones that need to be solved. And how are we looking to do that? So we need to have student-centered qualifications that put the experience of the student at the heart of that qualification. And we need to have assessments which are inclusive, assessments which are compassionate, and we need to have relatable and engaging content. As we go through this video and in our subsequent videos, we'll highlight for you how we've embedded those solutions across our GCSE MFL qualifications. So here's our vision for our GCSE MFL qualifications for 2024. Language is more than words. So language is communication, language is culture, and language is connection. Even though the GCSE is built upon this vocabulary approach, there is so much more to language learning than just learning a long list of words. So we want our qualification to be built on a foundation of inclusivity, accessibility, and transparency. We want to take a compassionate and student-centered approach. That means that the only barrier between the student and the grade they deserve is the student's level of language ability. We want to make sure that our qualification reflects the needs of all learners, irrespective of why they're studying a language. And we need to make sure, therefore, that the assessments are clear, they're concise, they're straightforward, no hurdles, no tricksy questions, no hoop jumping, nothing extraneous to the actual assessment of language skill to get between the student and their ability to perform to their best. The content needs to be engaging, it needs to be meaningful, and it needs to be relatable. It needs to be something that feels like it's within the experiences of our learners, and also opening up their experiences to things which perhaps they might not have experienced yet, perhaps they might never experience, but within those confines of the language classroom, their minds and their horizons can be opened up. That is one of the key joys of language learning. So here are some of the key basics of the new GCSE. The first critical point is that your year 8s will be the first cohort. So you already have students on their pathway to the new GCSE. It's important to note that one of the features of the new GCSE is no presumed prior knowledge. So the vocabulary list that's been developed for the GCSE doesn't presume any prior Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 learning. And therefore it really does start from the basics, numbers 1 to 10, days of the week, etc. So what you're covering for your existing year 8s and across your Key Stage 3 curriculum is highly likely going to be entirely appropriate for that new GCSE. Tiering continues, and the speaking assessment as 25% of the qualification as non-examined assessment continues. What that means is basically it's just like it is now. We set the tasks, you administer them as the teacher examiner, but we take them in from you and we mark those. Some of the new features of the new GCSE, so there is a heightened focus on sound symbol correspondences. That's a fancy way of saying what the words look like and what they sound like. You will, of course, have been teaching pronunciation and spelling for as long as you've been teaching your language. So whilst this is new in terms of its focus in the GCSE, it isn't something that you won't have already been doing. There is a different approach to the assessment objectives, which I will show you, and a very positive change, I think we would all agree, is the rubrics will now all be in English. In terms of the vocabulary, there is a much smaller vocabulary list in the new GCSE. 1,200 words at the foundation tier, 1,700 words at the higher tier. As a basis of comparison, it's about 2,500 words in the GCSE currently. The other thing which is different is where have those words come from? 85% of those words have been taken from the top 2,000 most frequently occurring words in the language. The remaining 15% have been a free choice to enable us to backfill and plug any of those vocabulary gaps that don't really meet the needs of our demographic, of our age group, of the interests and experiences of students in that kind of 15, 16-year-old bracket. The other thing that you will notice is quite different, and again, I think in a positive way, is that there is significantly less inference in the new GCSE, and where there is inference, it is only in the reading, not in the listening anymore. We're going to go through each of the papers in detail in their own videos. So for this slide, I'm just going to focus on the qualification at a glance. The first thing to note is that there are 4 papers. Doesn't sound particularly noteworthy, but with the new assessment objectives, the skills could have been combined together. Our research, though, told us that overwhelmingly teachers and students preferred to keep them separate. Another thing to draw your attention to is that each of the papers is worth 25% and each of the papers is marked out of 50 at both foundation tier and higher tier. That means that there isn't any scaling for any of the papers. Broadly then, in terms of the detail, looks quite familiar across all of the papers. Prep time for the speaking and then 3 distinct tasks, the read aloud being the most new, the role play, the picture task and the conversation being more familiar. In the listening, you've got your listening comprehension, which is familiar from the current specification. However, you'll notice the more generous assessment time, and that's because we afford the students 3 listens. Same amount of material, they just get to hear it 1 extra time. The new task in there is the dictation. The reading will look very familiar, your reading and then your translation. And again, your writing will look familiar too, your picture task, your open response writing tasks, and then your translation. So I mentioned that the assessment objectives do look quite different from the current GCSE ones, but if you're a A-level teacher as well as a GCSE teacher, you will probably think that these do look more familiar, closer to how the A-level is structured. So AO1, understand and respond to spoken language in speaking and in writing. That is the AO you will see assessed in the listening and the speaking assessment. So you will listen to French and you will respond in writing in the listening exam. You will listen to French and you'll respond to speaking in the speaking exam. For AO2, understand and respond to written language in speaking and writing, you'll find this in the speaking exam, the reading exam and the writing exam. Where it says written language, this could also include things like pictures. So a picture description in a speaking exam would be covered by AO2. AO3 is your accurate grammar and vocabulary, and you'll notice that that has been set at 20%. In the current GCSE it's at 10%, so immediately we might think, oh gosh, the amount of emphasis that's been put on accuracy and grammar has doubled in the new qualification. But actually, this is to account for these new features of the GCSE that aren't in the current one. So read aloud and dictation, the marks for doing those accurately are assigned to AO3. The number of marks that are assigned, and therefore the percentage of the qualification as a whole, for speaking and writing grammatical and vocabulary accuracy is still around 10% of the qualification. So actually, when you look into the detail of where those marks have been allocated, it's around about 10% for speaking and writing, like it is now, and then the additional 10% for the read aloud and the dictation. Thank you for listening to this video that's been introducing you to our accredited GCSE French specification and the structure which will be consistent for the German and Spanish specifications too. In our next videos, we'll be getting into the thematic contexts, the assessments and the individual papers in more detail, and we look forward to seeing you then.